Thank you all for coming. Salute and hi to our YouTube audience. You're here on Ujima Wednesdays, where we focus on and discuss financial and political workshops, where we kind of work through certain matters that are raised by community, and learning a lot more in terms of what we want from our communities and of our communities. And for those who are less familiar, welcome to Ujima, where we are creating a cooperative arts and business ecosystem with your support and you at the center. Particularly focused around folks of color concentrated in Boston, to create a better tomorrow that is less extractive, that's more regenerative, all around holistically. So without further ado, we have Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative, who's been with us all month of July, has really blessed us with their time and really thinking about processing participatory planning and process all around. And so we'd like to just give them space to kind of start off, but to be really kind of like honed in terms of what the conversation is today. We're talking about the launch of your fund. So we have Michael Partis here, and Jorman is pronounced with a kind of like a J sound, correct?
Yep, that's good.
All right, perfect. Who are representing Bronx. Y'all missed it earlier. We had a mixtape from artists originally from the Bronx. So we had Biggie, we had Africa Mbada. You know, we had a couple of things for y'all, but you know, it's all good. We'll catch it next time. So thank you. And if I didn't say it already, I'm Johnny Charles, Managing Director of Ujima Fund. And let's get started. So if you guys want to start, and for our community here that's available right now, this is more so a discussion, a little bit more informal. And what we're looking for is really your questions around what does this look like, the vision, and if you can use your own relative experience with the Ujima Fund for our members and guests who are in this space, feel free to do so. But this is really about everyone really kind of learning from this information. So feel free to ask questions, as many as you want, and no question whatsoever that's being lifted from you is being considered as silly or out of tone or out of balance. So feel free to ask as many questions as possible. You can do that in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and go ahead and do that. So just wanted to make sure that disclaimer was out. Thank you, fellas, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Johnny, and everyone. Really appreciate the invitation. It's been a great month together. And last of this series, much more conversation and partnership definitely to come, as with sister organizations and allies in this work. So just to kick us off a bit, I'm Michael Partis. I'm the Executive Director of BCDI, the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative. We are a community-led, equitable economic development organization. Our approach towards creating a democratic, sustainable economy, specifically that creates wealth for low-income BIPOC folks in the Bronx, is economic democracy, which is a deep community governance, decision-making system, philosophy, and process that coincides with a community wealth building strategy, really focused at attacking the racial wealth gap. And you've heard some of this if you've been following the series, but in short, our model is premised on movement building. So there's a deep association and commitment to community organizing that is led by residents of the Bronx. And also on the economic front, we are critically thinking about how do we create wealth and capital where there's community ownership and where folks in our community, the longitudinal poverty that often marks the Bronx, how do we change those outcomes? How do we transform the system in order to have greater wealth along long-standing Bronx residents? And so part of what we also do is we focus on those strategies, from work with cooperatives, matchmaking, businesses in the community, to purchasing opportunities, et cetera. So that's our organization, that's our model. In our model, we have 6 infrastructure projects, which are 6 projects, things that we believe need to be into existence in order to transform the economy, in order to create deeper democracy. You've heard about a few of them in the prior weeks, but the one this week we're going to focus on is what we call the Bronx Fund. So what we want to do this week a bit is take some time on the founding aspirations of that fund, right? What was the context and what made us decide that we need a wealth fund that is governed and managed by community and that transform ownership and capital in the community to not only reduce the racial wealth gap, but allow for greater self-determination. Jorman, our founder, co-founder, board member, will talk a little bit about that origin. Then we'll go into a bit on the current context, just what are the, at the community level, what is our local community, our coalition, our network, what are the capital needs? What are the equity needs? What are people talking about and feeling right now? And how does that shape the fund? And then we'll get into the next steps, right? Kind of where we're at now and what we're envisioning that the fund could be. And so with that, I'm gonna hand it to Jorman. Again, Jorman, he'll introduce himself a bit, but Jorman is a co-founder, a day one, as we like to say, a day one co-founder and current board member of BCDI. And Jorman will talk a bit about why we felt a Bronx fund was important. Jorman, I hand it off to you.
Hi, Joe. Thank you. So hello, everyone. What up? My name is Jorman Nunez. I'm the director of the Just Urban Economies program at MIT CoLab, which is a lab out of MIT in Massachusetts. I'm based here in New York. I grew up in the Bronx. My background really is in community organizing and in electoral organizing and electoral work. And I'm one of the co-founders of the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative. So I'm gonna give a little bit of background. I just realized you've been with us this whole month, so I don't know if some of my other staff members or other leaders in BCDI gave some of this, but I hear this is on YouTube. So for the new folks chiming in, I think this would be critical background to know before getting into why the fund. So the Bronx, not unlike communities in Boston, Roxbury, et cetera, is a place we like to call a place of hopeful contradictions. You could, the census before this one, right, announced that the Bronx is the country's poorest urban county. In the U.S., we often get touted for our high rates of asthma, high rates of unemployment, violence, et cetera, et cetera. There are whole movies made about how dangerous and challenging the Bronx is, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, we have all these gems, all these assets that, unless you really are from here, experience being here, you don't normally see because it's not put out there. We have a really robust community organizing environment. Throw a rock, hit a community organization that's throwing down to help a community. We have large cultural institutions. We have, the country's largest food distribution center. We have lots of things. So oftentimes, where I come from, a tradition of organizers whose legacy is really about beating back the rampant arson that was happening in the 70s in the Bronx, right? Landlords were burning down their buildings to collect insurance money, and lots of places in the Bronx really looked like war zones. We had that instinct, had that orientation, right? It's that constant, there are all these needs, but at the same time, I'm aware of or at arm's length all these assets, right? That exist. And we've been doing community organizing for a long time, and at some point, a few of us got together and we started really analyzing the results of our efforts and the efforts of the folks whose shoulders we stand on, right? And we essentially came to this analysis to move forward. There's a lot of history there, but to move forward, that while you can put like what I'm about to say on a graph, right? You can say that over time, our organizing has been getting better and better. If you look, our bases have grown, especially because of social media. We're contacting a lot more members, a lot more regularly, training a lot more members, a lot more regularly. We're forming more and more coalitions that are fighting for more sophisticated policy demands. You can say that over time, our organizing has been getting better and better. But if you also chart on the exact same time frame, the economic status, the economic well-being, the economic power of our base, the folks with whom we organize with, right? They've been getting poorer and poorer at the exact same time. So our organizing isn't leading or isn't it art, but we're winning all the time. We're winning stuff every year. A lot of us have annual reports saying all these things that we're winning, right? So those wins don't lead our people to own and govern over the assets or things, the structures that are driving the policy changes that we're fighting against in the first place. Another way to say it, those victories aren't leading our people of owning and governing the structures that are making the decisions that we're fighting against in the first place, right? So the idea was, or behind the founding of BCDI, is how could we get community organizing to incorporate the tools of economic development so that our people who are in the trenches organizing can fight back, but also fight forward, and proactively build the economy we want to see, and do both. We got to beat up the bad actors, but we also got to become the good actors, and build a thing. So that was the vision. So we had that aspiration and got in partnership with the organization I now work for, the Community Innovators Lab at MIT, and did this analysis of the Bronx. We looked at different, we worked with like 10 students to do this whole study that looked at all different sectors and potential for community wealth building in the Bronx and what models exist out there. And we learned a few things, and we learned a lot of things that confirmed our suspicion that the Bronx may be resource or income poor, but it's totally asset rich. And there's lots of things you can leverage in advanced manufacturing, energy, healthcare, education to build wealth in the Bronx. So then it was like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? So one, we had a few questions, right? So one, and some of this Michael touched on a little bit. One was, how do we change the vision for the development trajectory of the Bronx, right? Towards one that's in line with community wealth building, economic democracy, et cetera, et cetera. We said, well, how is that set already in the Bronx? Well, New York City has a planning department. The Bronx has an economic development and planning organization. So we said we need to build the people's version of that. So we did. We wanted to build the policy and planning lab. And I believe, that's Catherine Media who runs it, who you may have heard from earlier this month. And that's the idea, right? Like, that is building the vision and the development trajectory across these sectors, everything that exists in the Bronx. How are we working towards creating new sources of community wealth and establishing economic democracy in the Bronx? We also were thinking, all right, if we have that development trajectory in place, if we have that vision, how do we build the political power and the co-governance models that will enable grassroots folks to advance that vision through policy, through finance, and other means, right? well, we're trying to build something called a civic action hub, that aligns, that is, you could think of it as like a coordinator or back office of all organizing happening in the Bronx, and helping to coordinate across all these organizations to make the moves and build the power needed to advance such an agenda, right? So then after, all right, so let's say we're advancing this agenda, we're actually winning. What else do we need? Well, we need to make sure we have the leaders that will implement this vision, right? And maintain it and sustain it and grow it over time. So how will we train the leaders in business, in government, in community-based organizations, in finance, et cetera, to operate effectively, right, within this new economic model or new economic paradigm? Well, we've established an economic democracy learning center that has been doing a lot of this work. And I tremendous gratitude, Michael, for putting links for all this all this stuff in the chat. And then the other question, and there's just two more questions. The other questions we were thinking of were like, what are the initial institutions, or what are the initial like organizations that we want to build that we think could leverage some of those local assets that we discovered in that study we did earlier and produce shared wealth now, right? For people. Where do we want to start? We don't just want to plan the vision. We don't want to just train the people, right? We don't just want to align our organizing. What can we build that produces shared wealth for people now, like gets us walking our talk? And that was two things: the Bronx Exchange, which you may have heard of, which localizes procurement from large anchor institutions. Or, sorry, a better way to say this is, one of the things we learned in the Bronx, right? If you look at the top 22 anchor institutions being very large organizations that can't just leave, right? Think the Bronx Zoo. The Bronx Zoo got Bronx in its name. Bronx Zoo ain't gonna get up and leave, anytime soon. Think, Bronx Community College, right? Think Montefiore Medical Center. Think, like hospitals, cultural organizations, universities, large anchor institutions like that. So if you look at the top 22, that study shown that collectively they spend $9 billion on stuff every year. Where is that money going, right? We built something called the Bronx Exchange, which is meant to work with those anchors to drive that spending towards local businesses that are committed to building community wealth, whether they're cooperatives, have other employee ownership models, employ, Bronx residents and pay living wages, whatever the case may be. So that's something that's tangible, that's helping to do that now. And that's one of the things we built, right? The Bronx Exchange. And then the other thing we built is the Bronx Innovation Factory. So historically, manufacturing has been a source of living wages for local communities. And with advancements of technology and the way the trajectory of our economy is generally going, and the fact that the not so commonly known, there's a big sort of bustling advanced manufacturing ecosystem growing in the Bronx. We've got people making drones that clean the Hudson River. We've got people that made machines that knit rubber that's never been done before, that has all these applications, whatever the case may be. That we should build the Bronx Innovation Factory, which is about training and educating folks to enter that sector and help cultivate the innovation skills for us to literally build new tech and advanced manufacturing solutions for a lot of the challenges we face in the borough. So then all of this, and now I'm going to get finally to the question, all of this, the last question we got, right, was, all right, how will this work be financed and sustained? So literally everything we've thought of about the Bronx Fund starts with that question, that we've developed what we think is a transformative vision and model for how to position local people to govern their regional economy, right? Like, how do you have say in what does it mean to work here? How do you have say in what does it mean to live here, right? But that model isn't free, and that model is going to take a lot of resources, and it's going to take a lot of diverse set of resources, our sweat equity, our time, but also financing. So I really want to first, before getting into this, applaud you all, because you all are way ahead of us in answering that question for you all, right? Our fund isn't like established, up and running and growing. I appreciated seeing the PowerPoint earlier, and some of the good news. So I humbly, right? Tremendous gratitude to y'all. But that's what drove the idea for us. And so first it was what needs funding, right? In order for this vision to grow. One is the actors that are actually advancing this work need to be funded to do it. And the actors that are really advancing this work are nonprofit, community-based organizations. So you have like the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, you have the Point Community Development Corporation that are without money in the beginning for this, right? Like without money or anything, like pushing, advancing this work. That's no way to scale this model. So, and we also knew that in some ways we'd have to circumvent philanthropy and not be and not circumvent philanthropy. The right way to say it is circumvent the over dependence on philanthropy, right? To grow and scale this work. So the idea is, what kind of fund can we build that will fund the actors that are actually driving this work to do this work? So that was one of the things. And then the other thing is these infrastructure projects, those things that I named before, need financing to grow as well. And at the same time, across the board, the mechanisms, the tools that we'll need to produce shared wealth initially are really business and real estate, right? Like folks have an equity in where they work, folks have an equity in where they live. So can we use a fund to better position the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative to acquire those types of assets so that we could, advance this new economic model, this new way of going for the borough. So I'll just end with, I know Michael will go into all of the current thinking, right? So we've been in existence for a while, I don't even know, 10 plus years, at this point, depending on who you ask, 8 years, depending on who you ask. But I'm day one, right? So I'm 10 years. So so the thinking has evolved over time, but lots of the ideas were, all right, it'll be hard. It's a lot of money to finance these infrastructure projects, to pay all these organizations. We were thinking that organizations roughly should be getting $250,000 a year at a minimum to fully advance this work. About 10 different groups, $250K a year, right? So we were like, that's a lot of money. So maybe instead of trying to figure out how to get all that money, can we convince somebody with a lot of money to let us hold it? So like an endowment, right? Like just let us hold it, and off the interest, we'll pay for it, right? So like there's a lot of rich folks that have come out of the Bronx, especially in hip hop. There's a lot of institutions that care about the well-being of the Bronx. The Bronx is one of the only boroughs in New York City that doesn't have like a community foundation, for example, which is how a community foundation would be structured, right? Like the money they're using is the interest they're making off of a larger pot of money they hold in. So we were thinking about that strategy. And if we wanted to do that, if we wanted to give organizations that much, it'd probably be around $60 million. And these are old figures, so maybe Michael will update this, but it's probably be like a $60 million endowment that, so we need to convince someone to let us hold $60, or a group of people let us hold $60, foundation, $60 million, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally we thought we needed to raise more money from other sources to actually have like a real estate acquisition fund, a business investment fund. And the infrastructure projects themselves just needed direct investment. So when you add up how we broke it all down, we thought we needed to raise roughly like an $120 million fund. And we needed to, you know, try to go to different capital sources to get it. So that was the history. So then Michael will talk about like where we got to, right? Because that was the dream. That was the the vision. That's where we got. And I really wanted to make sure I drove home that we're not like financiers or finance leaders or anything like that. The idea behind the development of a fund like this was all about advancing, financing the advancement of a different economic development paradigm in the Bronx, rooted in community organizing and the legacy that it's had in trying to, you know, bring the Bronx to be a place, you know, of justice, economic democracy. So I'll stop there and pass it off to our esteemed leader, Michael Partis, to, you know, share where we at now.
Hey everyone, I'm mindful of time, so I'll keep it really quick. Building on what Jorman said, if we think about the fund, right, on the other side of the horizon, this fund is capitalized and operating at such level that the returns is what supports BCDI. On the other side of the equation, what capital is getting out the door in order to create that sort of return? So there's the one level of like program-related investment, mission-related investment, donor-advised funds that are like endowment-like. And then there's the other idea of, is there a equity play? Is there an impact investing or sort of play that also at the same time does social good, aligns in values to economic democracy and what we're all about that Jorman shared? And finally, right, that will be able to really grow the local economy, the businesses that we want to see, right? The enterprises that we want to see, either ones that exist that we want to keep and grow, or ones that need to be brought into existence to be the suppliers at the place-based institutions or be the entities, right? So there's those two parts. There's the endowing so that economic democracy has a engine, right, to fuel it. And then there's the invest in what in order for the type of business, the type of business ecosystem we want to see to exist. So what I'll add is that we have two processes going on right now. The Bronx Exchange that Jorman mentioned, it works with BPOC-owned small businesses in the Bronx. So we provide technical assistance, but really we are focused on value-aligned businesses and work with cooperatives, supporting them to grow their revenue. For those type of businesses, access to traditional capital is a challenge, right? A huge challenge. And so for us, we're thinking about what is the flexible capital, right, that to support the infrastructure as it exists. Some of that is what is the changes or transformations to existing finance. And some of it, quite frankly, is that there needs to be new finance, right? There needs to be new models, because how long we've been asking CDFIs to do it, how long we've been talking to those sectors to do it, what's happening there. I think there's a second thing around that, which is then where is the equity, right, to help those businesses grow and scale. There's the survival part that flexible capital will be able to kind of meet needs, right, customized needs based on small businesses. The number of small businesses that are 5 workers or less in our communities, the ones that, you know, have unique sort of needs. There's the survival part, and then there's the grow part, right? Like, how do we actually grow this? And so what is the kind of equity thinking that needs to happen? That coincides, Bronx Exchange dealing with all these local businesses are seeing that, experiencing that. That couples with, on the second side, we talked about this last week, but we have a Bronx-wide plan, right? And there's a coalition of 12 organizations working together to create a 30-year economic development plan for the borough. The second thing that's come out of that, so that's the second process. What's come out of that is a clear call from the community, and it's in our 2021 Bronx People's Platform for non-extractive finance, specifically community cooperative finance. And so again, not only is it about flexible capital, but when we hear about that non-extractive piece and cooperative capital, we're also thinking about patient capital, right? What is the kind of investment that can hold and wait and then see its returns, but also understand that its returns are going into a broader kind of ecosystem building, larger impact structure. And so, I think Jordan mentioned, we see entrepreneurs like David Lee, who's turning, rubber into garments, into clothing, into material made clothing. We're seeing, worker cooperatives like Bioclassic, All Latino Worker Cooperative, trying to innovate in cleaning. How do they, stay safe given the environment, as well as continue to grow with all the opportunities that are there? And how do we all share in that wealth of revenue creating? We're looking at Lao, right? A local group who Bangladeshi women making masks, addressing needs of their community, trying to do wealth building. How do we support those type of entrepreneurs, those type of groups in the Bronx, committed to our values, growing community wealth, making a difference, being the transformation that we believe in, being in that deep, deep history and tradition that is still present that Jordan mentioned? This fund not only builds the BCDI, that's the infrastructure to support the economic transformation, this fund also meets these stakeholders where they're at in a community governed way, like the platform, in a community like the Bronx People's Plan and Coalition, in a informed way in what we see from the work we do on the ground with Bronx Exchange. So a fund that gets to the aspiration of fueling economic democracy, similar to how all these other institutions built on colonized wealth, how they do it, coupled with getting that capital into an impact form that meets our community in a way that doesn't exploit them, that grows our community in a way that's necessary for us to have ownership and self-determination, and that transforms this economy to represent that we can have something different. The stakeholders are the residents, and they are BPOC, and they are leaders in this, and they innovated their way into this. And so the fund and aspiration endows and fuels this economic transformation that we own, govern, and has a quantitative measure of change, but also gets to the current state of our economy and gets that capital out the door to folks who are doing the work and have not only, we don't believe in deficit models around here. So they have the social and economic capital to grow, scale, and represent the type of economy we want. So that's what we're figuring out, in short, really quickly. That's kind of what we're figuring out. That's what we continue to conceptualize what the community governance is like. And that's the type of things we look to you all and other sister organizations about. We're continuing to think about the structure. Is it a CDFI? Is it not? Is it what's the entity that gets this capital out the door and holds it and grow? We continue to think about the support that the businesses need. There's 1,000,001 accelerator programs these days. Do our folks need another accelerator program? Do they need something else, right? Is our transformative model the accelerator program, where it's not just how to fill out RFIs and getting coaching from these folks, but there's other type of leadership development that happens. The pieces are still what we're going after, but the call to action is clear. I know we're at time. I'll stop there. I don't know if we have time to take questions. I know 7:15, but I'll pause there to Johnny and James.
Thank you both. I think it's only right. We have folks that are coming in for member teams that follow the workshop. But I wanted to make space for a couple of questions if folks have any. Becky, what up? Jump on in.
Hey. Yep. Thank you for the presentation, just sharing your thoughts and your experiences. I guess Michael or Yorman, or both of you. I think my question is like, what do you think is a vehicle of non-extractive capital? And like I say this working for a CDFI, and we specialize in cooperative lending. However, like we have like two main teams. One is with technical assistance, which works with much more early stage businesses, much more like small micro enterprises. And then like our other lending is focused on cooperatives, but more mature cooperatives such as food cooperatives, some worker cooperatives, housing cooperatives, and the like. And I think a big tension in our organization is to see like, how do we provide adequate capital that meets the needs of these more smaller micro enterprises, but at the same time balance out the risk that comes with different types of enterprises, because like we're also backed by different investors, and like we've been exploring like, should we start like an equity fund? Should we just what should we do basically?
So I'll try to make a quick answer, and then Jordan, I'll make space for you too. Quick answer was, we are on our third set of consultants on how do we answer this. Two groups of graduate students, one person who now works in impact financing. Two answers said a CDFI can do this, and you just have to think a little differently about the funding sources and the capitalization. There's a lot more to say, but I'll leave. That was two sets of advice. One set of advice was it needs to be like an equity fund, and now you need to get the lawyers and everybody else involved to think about how you thread that needle. That's like the super kind of straightforward question of other way of saying we don't know. Some people, I think there's a thought that a CDFI that's a little bit different can get to this. But one other thing I will say too, on the risk part, there's a role for philanthropy to play in that risk piece as well. I mean, in short, a lot of risk we're talking about, what do people need? They need forgiveness. They need much longer runway. They need much more flexible payback, repayment. They need all of that, the patient, flexible capital and patient capital that we're talking about. You know, I heard last week Kellogg supported a group of CDFIs in New Orleans for a thing called debt equity. They don't have a link yet, but debt equity. In short, Kellogg, through their philanthropy, gave these sets of CDFIs money to mitigate the risk, right? To cover the risk that they would for these flexible and innovative financing, either debt or equity. And that was what got me interested, not just debt, but equity as well. I was like, oh, good, we should be doing that. And so how could others, I think particularly in philanthropy program, maybe not program related, but mission related, could do that. Sorry, that's straightforward.
Okay, what's the name of that organization? Because I'd like to look that up.
I will drop it in the chat and I'll mute. Jordan, did you want to add anything to that?
Just, you know, non-extractive financing is financing that works for the borrowers, where the lender, the benefit to the lender, right, is never exceeds the benefit that the borrowers could get. There are not a lot of vehicles in the US for that. Capital by its nature is extractive, but the models in terms of vehicles, the places that are inspiring to me are Seed Commons and the Working World. And those are, you know, they finance cooperatives with a shared risk debt model where you pay it back off of your profits. You don't pay back the loan. You know, there's no real collateral. Like, if you can't pay it back, I'm not coming and taking your stuff. So those are, in terms of vehicles, those are the ones that are exciting to me. There are others that I haven't looked into that I don't want to like recommend right now, but we would, you know, this is a role MIT Collab tries to play, and the more we find these things, the more we want to put it out there in the world. These are the vehicles that are doing it the right way.
Thank you both. Louise you had your hand up, so I want to make space for Louise to ask her question as well before we close off and transition. Louise, you're on mute if you're talking.
Manufacturing, because a lot of in South Boston, a lot of times, even Boston, people try to chase out the manufacturing. New residential moves in and they want to get rid of the factories. And I wonder what type of commute, and I think it's kind of snobbery. I think they should stay there. They're good paying jobs. They don't require, they pay more than some college graduates get. But there is another thing. We have burning for collect insurance in Boston in the Fenway in the 70s. But in the 80s, they went factory. They said that was an over-deprived area and all factories, parking lots. I used to walk there sometimes. I had to go to a meeting downtown. And I learned, well, there was loads of factories there, but they burnt a lot of them down to get them out so they could build the luxury condos on filled-in land. So I wonder what kind of community resistance do you get? Because I find out, I think manufacturing is looked down on. And then we're outsourcing it to other countries.
Yeah, I'm not. Oh,
No, I was gonna give you all space, but I didn't know if there was a need for clarity about the question, which was really kind of Louise was speaking to her observation about manufacturing facilities and buildings that have been dilapidated or forgotten and not necessarily been resourced or reused, and they should be doing that. And so I think the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, Louise, is more so, what is your community process in really reinvesting in existing manufacturing facilities and organizations in the Bronx itself?
No, my point is, so they're trying to get rid of existing manufacturing. Like in the waterfront, they burned it down, and some neighbors moved near manufacturing. New people, then they start complaining, you know, instead of just leaving them where they are. I mean, it's not, I mean, they have operating ones, but then they want that property for development or something, or residentials move there and they don't want it. That's what I'm thinking, community resistance. It doesn't even want a functioning manufacturing.
Got you. So it's really,
yeah, this is, oh,
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, this is often a tactic used in communities like ours. So like, I'm not sure about the specifics of Boston. So for that, I apologize, but I imagine these things are very, very similar in different places. You know, the Economic Development Corporation in New York City follows like a policy really hard called highest and best use. So the idea is that every piece of land, every square inch needs to, whatever goes on, whatever's public land, whatever they support, right, has to have the highest and best use. And really, it's just a way to support real estate. Like if you can build a development that will bring in higher rents, higher, you know, like, and it's more, you know, more wealthy people, right, coming in, that is a better value to society than something that doesn't do that, right? So then in community meetings, you can imagine, like, yeah, you can talk about manufacturing or whatever that's not understood, and you're like, what do you want? Do you want like housing? And then they don't talk about how that's housing that's going to displace them, right? Do you want housing? Do you want this, or do you want, you know, do you want that stuff? And it's often used as a tactic to divide us, when the truth is, you should be a part of the decision on what is the paradigm that the economic development organization should follow. Meaning, is highest and best use what you should use all the time around? If the Bronx was nothing but high rises and, you know, real estate and housing, is that the Bronx we want to live in? No, of course not. But that's what's happening, and that's often what's used to go against manufacturing. And that means sometimes, yeah, community folks are organized to go against it with a false choice that doesn't really make sense. So I just wanted to say, yes, you know, that happens here too. And I think it's we don't have the financing to invest in dilapidated properties to turn them into advanced manufacturing center. that's like the role of the city, and part of what you can do to make the city do those kinds of things is changing like these economic, the way they approach what's valuable when they're planning and stuff like that. And I think that's what y'all should do for Boston. I'll stop there. I know we out of time.
We definitely are. So first and foremost, I want to thank you both. I want to say bye to our YouTube folks first. Let's take it off of record. So bye YouTube. See y'all soon. And thank you for being a part of this with us.